In a secret location on the rich soils of the Blackall Range, Chris Johnson is watching his Leptospermum trees thrive.
I bought them in 100 mil pots, only about a couple of 100 mil high, and they're now, as you can see, 1.8, 2 metres high in 2 years. Incredible growth.
The publicity officer for Sunshine Coast Beekeepers Incorporated planted 850 trees, specifically in the hopes of harvesting medicinal honey from them.
I've got two varieties, Jen. Leptospermum polygallifolium, which is the common jellybush as people would know it. It is a variety, it's a cultivar. And then I've got Leptospermum petersonii, more mountainous sort of variety.
Chris Johnson is one of dozens of amateur and professional apiarists who've been working with Simon Williams, a researcher from the University of the Sunshine Coast.
For the last 3 years I've been looking into the distribution of the Leptospermum species around Australia and the bioactivity of each species to try to determine which Australian Leptospermum species have the necessary precursor to produce this medical Leptospermum honey. New Zealand's got the one species, Leptospermum scoparium, which produces what they now know as Manuka honey, and there's 87 Leptospermum species in the world. 84 of them are native to Australia and 82 are endemic, sharing Leptospermum scoparium with New Zealand and another species with Malaysia. There's a species in every state that has bioactivity, though we are finding that not every species produces honey each year, which is a little bit disappointing. Sunshine Coast, southeast Queensland, New South Wales, Northern Rivers definitely has some of the better, stronger species and seem to give a more continuous honey production.
And just as not all of those species in Australia are equal when it comes to honey production, the same applies to their medical potential.
I've tested 54 of the species to determine the different bioactivity of the species and which ones for beekeepers to target. It's definitely quite varied. So the nectar provides the dihydroxyacetone, which is the precursor to the medical properties in the honey. And within one of the more common species, Leptospermum polygallifolium or jellybush, we've seen levels that range from 1,000 parts per million DHA all the way up to about 30,000 parts per million DHA within the single species. So we've definitely seen a very large range, and that's one of the complications in Australia. The New Zealand Leptospermum scoparium is about middle of the range DHA. In Australia, we have species ranging from no DHA in their nectar, like Leptospermum laevigatum or coastal tea tree, to very high levels, 20 to 30,000 parts per million in Leptospermum polygallifolium and Leptospermum speciosum and whitei, which are all common in the Sunshine Coast. The higher the DHA in the nectar you start with, that will translate to a higher antimicrobial properties in the honey once it matures.
At his young Leptospermum plantation, beekeeper Chris Johnson didn't get the results he wanted from the honey produced from last year's first flush of spring flowers.
It's a little bit of activity, but right on the low level. But it's given me enough enthusiasm to think I can get it higher. It's in the lap of the gods, I think. It depends on the growing conditions at the time, how much nectar's in the plants.
He's hoping researchers will be able to pin down what makes the bioactivity of the nectar and honey so variable.
You get variations. You'll get variations from one bed to the other. Sometimes it could be as high as 50%. It's a matter of getting the plants right somehow. Weather conditions, I think. With
medicinal honey so valuable, Chris Johnson doesn't want the location of his plantation revealed. It's one of the conditions Simon Williams has agreed on.
All throughout the project we've promised confidentiality on individual tree locations, especially as there is now a market for Leptospermum plantations. So Pacific locations are obviously kept hidden. But in some publications, we've recently published 2 Leptospermum identification guides with a third in the works, and they all have rough location maps to give people an idea on where species might be and how to identify those species so they can know what they have in their backyard. We're opening more options for beekeepers. This used to be a honey that beekeepers would chuck out, bury in a hole, because it's quite strong tasting, not the traditional lightly flavoured eucalypts. I've had people tell me they can show me where they used to not go to get honey because they'd get Leptospermum honey, because not only is it darker and stronger tasting, it's also jelly-like. Jellybush is a common name for the species around here, around Sunshine Coast. And it forms a jelly in the honeycomb, and that makes it a lot harder to extract, so it's a lot of effort and time, which used to not be valuable at all. And now it's just giving more options, so this wasted honey is now one of the more valuable honeys in Australia.